Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. We're going to be reviewing Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen DVD. Honestly, in my mind, the documentary put out by WWE here for Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen is honestly one of the top DVDs ever made by WWE. I believe that they show the career of Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, Barry Windham, Ole Anderson, J.J. Dillon, in the highest regards. To me, honestly, the Four Horsemen is one of the best groups / stables, whatever you want to call them. I believe that they're one of the best to ever be in the world of professional wrestling. You know, they're bigger than the NWA. They're bigger than WCW. They're bigger than WWE. You know what they did. For the Crockett promotion back in those days, put them on the map as a major player to be in the same conversation with the WWF back in the day. Basically, Ric Flair came into the world of professional wrestling, and when he was brought in as one of the Anderson cousins. So we already have a connection between Ric Flair and Ole Anderson. When Arn Anderson was found by Ric Flair wrestling down in Florida, he was asked to be brought into the Crockett promotion. When they brought him in, basically Ole Anderson, who had the book at the time, really looked and saw that Arn basically had the same look that Ole did, and thought that he would be a great way to fit in to the Andersons, sort of moving them into the new generation of wrestling. So that is how Arn, Ole, and Rick came to be. Tully is the one question mark at the group, because I never really know how he became a horseman, but basically Tully talked about the fact that he was a champion at the time, and the Andersons were champion at the time, and a lot of times they would be put together in six-man tags on house shows to sort of bring in a large crowd, having all the champions involved in one match. Even at sometimes, Tully would be involved in eight-man tags, bringing Ric Flair into play as well, to bring everybody's storyline full circle. Basically, they had, huge feuds going up against guys like the Road Warriors, Magnum TA. These guys touched everybody, including Dusty Rhodes, one of the biggest stars in the world at that time. It's easily debatable. We've talked about it before on like the WWE rivalries review, talking about Dusty versus Flair over who was the bigger star. Both of these guys had egos that thought they were the ones that brought everyone to the dance. To me, honestly, I've always thought that Ric Flair was the biggest star in the NWA and the Crockett promotion. I think that, guys like Magnum TA and Dusty Rhodes played a part of bringing people to the stadiums and arenas to see wrestling and buying tickets. But I think Ric Flair was the one guy that was sort of the cartoonish heel that people were paying for those tickets because they knew that one day he was going to lose, and they wanted to be there when it all went down. Basically, the saying of the Four Horsemen came from Arn Anderson when basically they had a TV taping, and normally at the end of the TV tapings, World Championship Wrestling on TBS, they would have, interview time. But there was only 3 minutes left on the show. They had big matches coming up for Tully, for the Andersons, as well as Ric Flair, all being championship matches, trying to draw a house. So they just sort of put them all out there at once. When Anderson's turn was to talk, he basically said it just hit him all at once. He looked around, saw these four guys standing with him, and basically said, "These are the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse." And everybody that knows a background from reading the Bible knows that the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, not good. They're coming to hurt you. And that's basically where it just caught on like wildfire. Basically say that the next time that they had a show, there was, sort of middle-aged college kids. They're all dressed up to the nines in their suits and sunglasses, all with the Four Horsemen fingers up, all holding Four Horsemen signs, and they had realized that they had caught lightning in a bottle. Of course, the Four Horsemen ran really, really strong as a group from 85 into 87. Possibly, one of the biggest things that you could see are their War Games matches that are featured on the WWE Network, as well as on the War Games DVD/Blu-ray set that came out. Plenty of matches included on here as well, in the bonus features, as well as on the 2-disc set. But only 2 discs there. But everything came down to the end, basically when Tully Blanchard, who had a baby doll as his valet, basically Blanchard lost the match and blamed baby doll for the match. He slapped her, and that created a feud between Tully and Dusty Rhodes, where baby doll started managing Dusty Rhodes, and then J.J. Dillon stepped in as the manager to Tully Blanchard. I honestly never knew that that's how the connection was made between J.J. and the Four Horsemen. I always thought that maybe because, he was sort of the elder, wrestler. He just had insight, and he was just brought into the group like that. He ended up becoming a really good manager for the group. Sort of running it like a business, and, being able to put him over in interviews, as well as stepping in and wrestling in a few of the matches as well. All right, here we go. This is when the breakup of the Horsemen happens, and this happens in 87, when basically Tully and Arn think they're getting screwed on paydays, and basically they leave to be the Brainbusters working for WWF. At this point, to keep the Horsemen running as a team, Lex Luger and Barry Windham are brought into the group to take their spots. Arn and Tully do really well wrestling for Vince. They wrestled there for, I believe, 2 years. They were champions. They had really good matches against the Rockers. I can honestly tell you that even though they were champions, I don't think that they were the highlight of the tag team division, but the tag team division in WWF was so strong in those days that, they had a run there. They made some money. It is what it is. Lex Luger moved into being one of the Horsemen, and he held this spot really, really well. It's just that as time drew, the NWA, as well as Crockett Promotion, thought that Lex Luger was going to be their answer to Hulk Hogan, and he had to be moved out of the group to become the #1 babyface of the company. Nothing wrong against Luger's run. Barry Windham actually became, a true Horseman. Whenever WWE talks about the Horsemen now, they never really include Ole Anderson. They always include Barry Windham into the group, like when Ric Flair had his retirement night. I don't know if that's a knock on the fact that Ole Anderson talks so bad about the world of professional wrestling, and Ole Anderson never really made any friends when he was in wrestling. As a booker, and even as a member of the Horsemen, he always sort of separated himself from the group, spent a lot of time with his family. And that's what led to him getting kicked out of the Horsemen as well, is that basically Ole became less reliable. It's one thing that he wanted to be spending the time with his family, but he was just starting to blow off shows to go see his son wrestle and just spend time at home. And he was missing dates, so they gave him the boot and he was done. From this point, basically when Arn Anderson returns, Tully Blanchard fails a drug test with WWF, even though he's put in his papers to leave and come back to be a member of the Horsemen with Arn. Basically, Crockett gets wind of him failing the drug test, and they basically bounce his contract, saying that they're not going to honor it anymore, and they don't want him. It's not that they really didn't want him, they just took it as a chance to try and pay the guy less. And because of the decrease in pay, Tully thought he was worth more than that, and decided that he wasn't going to take it. At this point, I think Tully's career in wrestling is pretty much done. Because of the failed drug test, he doesn't go back to WWF. He end up wrestling for the AWA, which in my mind in 1990 was dead. He ends up, just doing some independent runs as well as wrestling in the early ECW, wrestling against Shane Douglas. But it's sort of a shame that the guy who really was, in my mind, it's hard when you have a collection of guys like this, like Arn, like Flair, like Tully Blanchard, to say that he was the best wrestler of the group. But to me, honestly, Tully Blanchard was money. And, the only reason why he wasn't world champion was because of Ric Flair. And that's not a knock on Ric Flair as well. But basically, when the Horsemen reformed in late 1989, basically they were running an angle where they had Sting join the Horsemen. This was never really to make Sting a real member of the Horsemen. It was just trying to get Ric Flair out of a match with Sting at the Great American Bash. And when Sting did sign the contract, the Horsemen kicked him out and gave him that huge beatdown. This led to Sting winning the championship from Ric Flair, becoming the main guy. And to replace him in the Four Horsemen, they added Sid Vicious, who is a very intimidating, very big heel to join the group. This is when Ric Flair starts to turn nasty. The Horseman is his creation, and he wants to protect it, but he basically says that Sid is a guy that was only looking out for himself and instead of the group, and that is where things sort of, just run into the wall. In 93, Ric Flair and Arn Anderson bring back the Horsemen at the Slamboree pay-per-view. Basically, this is where they're running a Flair for the gold. They had asked Tully Blanchard to come back and join the group on a $500 per appearance fee. And Tully basically thought that was not enough and still turned down rejoining the group. This is when Paul Roma rejoins the group. And honestly, in my mind, the Horsemen have one more good run with the NWO in 1995. But in my mind, this is the death of the Horsemen. You end up having Paul Roma, Arn Anderson, and Ric Flair feuding with Barry Windham, as well as the Hollywood Blondes, Austin and Pillman. And they're just not drawing any fans to the promotion at that time, which leads to a feud between Arn and Ric Flair, which pays off at, I believe, that would be Fall Brawl, War Games, 1995, not in the cage. This is the same one that has Team Hulkamania taping on the Faces of Fear, Dungeon of Doom. One of those. I always get those two confused, what it's called. But one of the weakest heel teams against the biggest dream team of baby faces. Macho Man, Sting, Hulk Hogan, and Vader got replaced by Flair, didn't he? Flair's in the other match, dumbass. I can't remember the four, but in 95, we ended up having Flair and Arn bring back the Four Horsemen. This, of course, is with Chris Benoit joining the team. Benoit is joined by Mongo McMichael, a former football player that was brought in to do the announcing for Monday Nitro, but ends up joining the Horsemen after turning on Kevin Green of the Carolina Panthers. Very big sports tie-over at the time. Honestly, in my mind, Mongo and Benoit were really good members of the team. They had the real good run against the NWO when basically the Horsemen stood up for WCW and basically decided they were going to try and take them out. They had the War Games where the NWO ended up winning. Arn Anderson stepped out of the group, which ended up bringing in Curt Hennig, who ended up turning on the group to join the NWO, which did end up bringing in a new member in Dean Malenko. Malenko was a real wrestler's wrestler, but from then on, the group just sort of hung until basically Benoit and Malenko left the group to join the WWE. But even at that time, they had left the Horsemen and joined the Revolution group, which was basically a new member of the Horsemen with Shane Douglas. And who was the fourth guy? I can't remember who the fourth member of them was. But, Perry Saturn. That's who it was. But that is your Horsemen DVD. Honestly, in my mind, one of the greatest groups of all time. You can't beat this. If you haven't seen it, go out and check this out. I think it's on the network. If not, it's very, very cheap on Amazon. Pick this one up today.